Welcome to Barnyard Language, honest talk about running farms and raising families. We are Katie and Arlene, an Iowa sheep farmer and an Ontario dairy farmer, with 6 kids, 2 husbands, and a whole lot of chaos between us.
While this is a podcast for farm families, sometimes our content isn't for the whole family. So kick off your boots, reheat your coffee, and join us for some Barnyard Language.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Barnyard Language. Katie, what's going on in Iowa? What's the news?
Harvest. It's just all harvest all the time.
Your harvest? Your neighbor's harvest? Everyone is harvesting all over the place?
Everybody's
harvesting.
A few folks are pretty close to done, I think. Would be closer to done if things would quit breaking. I don't want to give any specifics because it feels like tempting fate. But thankfully, most things have been more in the parts run breakage rather than insurance claims and $100,000 checks line of breakage.
Or calling in people from other locations to come and fix it, or load it up on a trailer to bring it somewhere else to fix it.
Yeah. Oh, thank God. One upside of having old equipment is that there's nowhere to take it. So if we can't fix it, it's just not going to get done, really.
That's one way of looking at it. See, I am married to someone who is very much in the skilled at livestock and not skilled in fixing things. So if something breaks, it's pretty much, real basic stuff. But when it comes to tractors and equipment, if it breaks, someone else is coming to fix that problem, not us.
Yeah. My husband started collecting tractors real tractors. I think he was 13 when he bought the first one, and then he went to school for tractor mechanics. So this is his happy place.
Right, yeah.
I'm sure he would be much happier if he had more time and more resources and more space to pursue it. But he does enjoy it, and he's good at it.
I have been to your place, and it does feel like, sorry, Jim, but it does feel like the tractors already consume quite a bit of space.
I think that's the problem, is that they've consumed all the space that would be the space where you would work on the thing if that space didn't already have a tractor in it.
Oh, I see. The working on the tractor space. I get it. So you'd have to clear out a tractor in order to work on another tractor.
Sorry, dear. So many of the tractors do not move under their own power that moving one to put something else in its place is not as straightforward.
That's not just turn it on and pull it out. Yes, got it.
And then you end up with things like the elevator to the hayloft breaks, and then you end up with a wagon of hay in the shed as well, which takes up even one more tractor space.
And how is the progress going on a certain snapping turtle Halloween costume that you are creating? Or has he changed his mind since he decided that's what he wanted to be?
No, he's very set on it, which is great. I was feeling better about it until someone invited us to go to trunk or treat, which is fantastic because I hate trying to go on a school night after dark. But trunk or treat is on Sunday, which is 4 days before Halloween.
Right. Maybe he can wear one Halloween costume for trunk or treat and another Halloween costume for actual Halloween day. Is he allowed to wear costume? Are they allowed to wear costumes to school? Some schools don't.
They don't do costumes at school, which I think is totally understandable. Speaking of school, though, I hope Mrs. Acevedo is listening to this. Hi, Lisa. She probably doesn't, but that's too bad. Last night, benefits of a very small school with a really great teacher. Last night, I get a Facebook message at, 8:30, somewhere in there, late, from my son's first grade teacher. It was also sent to one of our friends who also has a son in first grade with my son. And it was a meme from the office regarding our children's behavior yesterday in first grade. And thankfully, the teacher is one of those people who actually really likes teaching first grade and has done it for a long time and seems to think our kids are funny, thank God. Both of our sons insist that they were not being silly, and it must have been maybe some other little boys that were being silly, but they would never do something that would get memes sent. But I do appreciate having a relationship with my kids' teacher that she's just sending memes about my kids' behavior. And it's not in any way negative or judgmental.
Right. Yeah. But it's a joke. It's not that you need to do anything about it.
They're 6-year-old boys. I don't know what you think we would do about it.
And that's the tricky thing, especially with young kids. And I often found, like, if you got messages, and I did lots of times, about their behavior at school, I usually just considered it information to have and not so much that I had to do anything about it. Because if it happened at 9 o'clock in the morning and my kid gets off the bus at 4:30 in the afternoon, they don't even remember that thing that I might get them in trouble with. If it's something serious or a discussion that we need to have, obviously, we're going to talk about it and there might be consequences. But, like the other stuff, the teacher has dealt with it in the moment, and there's only so much you can do 6 or 7 hours later when that little person comes home and doesn't even remember the thing. They just remember the thing that just happened on the bus that might have upset them or that they want to tell you about, and they don't even remember what happened that morning that they maybe got in trouble for then.
I have to say, I also really appreciate how open communication has been because, like, my son got sent to the principal's office last week, 2 weeks ago. I don't know. What is time anyway? And I immediately got a message from the teacher that said he really wasn't being that bad. I had a migraine and I just could not. So it seemed better to let him go hang out with somebody else for a little bit. And I really appreciate that because if he had come home and said, I got sent to the principal's office, like, I would have been a lot more worried than I had a migraine and couldn't deal with your kid. Because, I mean, I've dealt with my kid while I had a migraine, and if I'd had somewhere else to send him, I would have done it too. So,
yeah, you definitely would have sent him to the principal if that was an option.
Yep. Nothing else is happening. I don't know. What's happening at your place, Arlene?
Well, it feels like just the regular stuff this week. There hasn't been a lot of extras, I don't think. We went and got pumpkins, so that was a thing because my 9-year-old has a vision for what his jack-o'-lantern's going to look like this year, so we had to go and get the perfectly shaped pumpkin. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law own a market garden, so that's great. We go there and pick up some pumpkins. And I picked up a bunch of pie pumpkins so I can freeze some of those. I don't freeze a lot of things, but pumpkin is one thing that I do actually make the effort to put away for winter. So this week is a lot of my kitchen pretty much smells like pumpkin every day because you can only put so many in your oven. So it's kind of slow going, but I'm putting pumpkin in the freezer. What else is going on? Doesn't feel like a whole lot, which is fine. It's okay to have a boring week every now and then. We're in the lead up to the Royal Winter Fair, so that's a lot of logistics in terms of scheduling and figuring out who's going to be where, who's going to look after kids here at home, who's going to look after cows, all of that kind of stuff. Oh, we did have one last cow show last week, so that's another thing. But I was not on the show crew, so some of our heifers went, but I didn't have much to do with it other than going to watch for a bit and being the one to have to make sure to get back home in time for chores that day because everyone else was at the show. So the second last show of the year, it's almost over. Not that I'm counting down. But
Finding stand-in farm help is that much more to when you dairy than it is even with like beef cattle because the skill level and risk of what happens if it's done badly or not at all is very different with dairy cows.
right. Yeah. And, and the type of equipment that they have to operate and all the things they have to know. There's a bit more to it. But actually, that's another thing that's been happening lately. We had a new staff person is training. They'd expressed interest a while ago. And at the time, we weren't sure if we needed any help. And then realized that we do, especially if we're going to be away and we would like some of our kids to come with us, which becomes more challenging now that they're also part of the chore schedule. So we've been doing a bit of training of her and it's going well. So she's ready to go for the Royal. So that's great.
Nice. It's always just nice to have, it's always nice to have someone you can call for an emergency, even if you don't have anything planned.
Yeah. And the boys will be here. They're not going, the Royal's not their jam. So they're not going to be in Toronto with us, but they will still be in school. So we don't want them to have to milk cows and then shower and get on the bus, and there isn't time because they get on pretty early in the morning, so they don't have to do morning chores before school. So we will need some morning help, even though they're here to do the afternoon shifts. So think it's all going to work out. Fingers crossed.
Well, good.
Yeah. Anyway, why don't we go ahead and introduce our guest for this week?
All right.
Today we are talking to Kacee Bohle, who is joining us from Indiana. And Kacee, we start each of our interviews with the exact same question. So we always ask the people on our show, what are you growing? So for our farming people, that's usually crops and livestock, but can also be kids and businesses and all kinds of other stuff. So Kacee, welcome. And what are you growing?
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. That is a very loaded question. So, my parents are actually the ones growing stuff on the farm, which is corn and soybeans here in West Central Indiana. But myself, growing two kids, growing a business, growing my mindset, and to be determined on all the other things. I feel like it's a constant thing for me.
Right. So what age of kids? For farmers, we want to know the breeds of cows and how many, but with kids, we want to know what stage you're at and how crazy things are in your house.
Yes, I have an 8-year-old son and a soon to be 2-year-old daughter.
That is a interesting combo, I'm sure.
Neither were planned. They just gotta happen.
You mentioned your business, but we're going to get into that in a little bit, but do you want to kind of briefly tell us what your business is and what you're working on?
Yeah, you bet. So you ask, what am I growing? And I think that I'm one of the gardeners, right? Like I feel like I'm constantly pouring in and helping other people grow. And I do that as a coach, speaker, and trainer within the agriculture industry. So helping ag professionals grow and develop both personally and professionally. It's so much fun.
So you mentioned your parents, so I'm assuming you're a farm kid. So what is your background when it comes to agriculture, both in terms of how you grew up and the different ways that you've been involved in the industry?
Yeah, so we're fourth generation row crop farms, like I said, here in Indiana. My parents are working alongside each other, and my husband and I and my sister kind of help out during the busy seasons. We don't have any livestock. It was something that they did away with before I was around. My dad had it growing up, and then you know what that looks like in the 80s. I mean, I wasn't around or did any of that kind of stuff, but they had cattle and a hog operation, and unfortunately just didn't work out, and so we stuck to what we knew and could grow really well here on this black soil, which is corn and soybeans. And so grew up on the farm, didn't know anything other than agriculture. We lived in the middle of nowhere, so had a very rural upbringing out in the middle of nowhere. I did not participate in 4-H because we had to pick one or the other. And since FFA was a part of our school, it was something that I didn't have to get a trip back to town for because we just kind of hung out at the school till it was time for a meeting. So I did FFA. I did my project on chickens. They didn't last long because unfortunately rodents got into them. But we're just now starting our 4-H adventure. So my 8-year-old is in third grade, and here in the States, I don't know if that's the same thing in Canada or not, but that's the first year that they can like officially be in 4-H. So I am learning right alongside my son when it comes to the whole county fair thing and what that all looks like. But I grew up on the farm, and I just knew I needed to be in the ag industry, but I had no idea what that looked like. I just knew that I needed to get out of our small town, go make something of myself, and hopefully have that American dream of the white picket fence in the subdivision and really just try to make something of myself. And so I left the farm, worked for a lot of different ag tech companies. I sold seed for a while, worked for John Deere for a while, and just kind of job hopped for about 14 years throughout the industry. And then eventually, probably 4 years ago, just kind of made the decision that I wanted to do something else. I wanted to be my own boss and made a plan to exit. And so I've been on my own for a couple of years now, doing the whole coaching, speaking, and training thing. And that's something that I'm still able to pour back into the industry, but do it on my own terms.
So how do you get started in that kind of field? And I'm going to say, I hope this isn't offensive, but I think a lot of people in ag are a bit skeptical of that kind of work. So I'm just going to put that out there. And so I'm giving you the opportunity to kind of pitch, like the type of training that you've had and what you can give back to people who are, looking for your services.
Oh, it's not offensive at all. I totally agree with you. And I wouldn't say that's been a challenge of mine because believe it or not, this is something that a lot of people want and need, but they don't really know that it exists in our industry. So they don't know to ask for it. And so it all kind of started for me when I was mid career. I was probably 30 something, maybe like late 20s, I would say. And I had just had my first son. I was climbing the corporate ladder. I was trying to figure out like how do you raise a family, also climb the corporate ladder, also try to help out with your family's legacy and not feel like you're letting people down. And like there was just so many hats that I was wearing at the time, and I didn't have anybody to turn to. I didn't know, like my mom and dad didn't go to college, so it's not like they had this corporate experience. They didn't know what that was like. I didn't have any female mentors who had also raised kids, who was working in the ag industry, who was juggling both of those hats. And so I just felt like I didn't have anybody to talk to, if I'm completely honest with you. And around that time, it was before the whole mental health trend came into the ag space, right? Like it was still very voodoo to talk about. It was still very like, we don't want to tell people that we're actually struggling. And so I just kind of started this Facebook group, and I was just like, hey, if you're somebody in the ag industry who just wants to grow personally developed, personal, professional development, things like that, let's just come in here and just be our own community. And this was really before all of the different Facebook groups became a thing. Now you can find a Facebook group for literally everything. But I started this Facebook group and I had like 400 people overnight join this group. And so I knew that I wasn't the only person in the ag industry who desired to like show up better to life, right? And so I started taking some different leadership courses, reading all of the self-help books. And the one that really just kind of kickstarted it for me was Purdue Extension had a leadership through our county program. And so I took that and I realized I really don't actually know what leadership is. Turns out I had it all wrong. And so that really just kind of kickstarted the need for me to show up better and realize I was very conditioned, right? Like I had all of these mindsets and these beliefs that were not actually serving me very well. They were actually holding me back, but they came from those people that I was around. And, I've since learned that everything that you know and believe has either been caught or taught. And so how do you approach this in a way that's like, screw all of you because you've all held me back. You've all taught me the wrong thing. Like not to wave this finger on everybody around me. Like it's your fault that I'm thinking these things, but also do something about that in a way that's like effective, right? Like how do I call out these beliefs in a way that doesn't piss everybody else off around me, but is really constructive, right? And so I don't know if you guys have seen the show Duck Dynasty, but like these burly men with these big long beards is a TV show down here. And my dad is kind of like that, right? Like he's very quiet. He doesn't really speak a whole lot unless he's got a really good point to make. He's got the big beard. He's a typical farmer guy. And so if I were to go up to my dad and be like, hey, let's talk about leadership development, it's not really something he'd be like, what are you talking about? And so, but I did talk to some people who were also my age. And so they were more so like, let's talk about this. Like, I want to show up better. I want to lead my team better. I want to work smarter, not harder. I want to be able to communicate with people older and younger than me. I want to be able to be more productive in not only my actions, but making sure that I'm doing things more intentionally, right? I want to do work that actually gets me excited. I have a higher quality of life kind of expectation. I want more of the work-life balance. And I don't really know where that came from. I just know that it's something that's becoming more and more of a non-negotiable for people my age. And so they want to talk about this stuff. And so I went through all these different courses. I went through certification, through Maxwell Leadership, and realized like that doesn't necessarily apply to the ag industry. So how can I tailor what I'm learning to make it make sense for our seasonality, to make it make sense for some of the conditionings and the culture and the way of life that we have that all these other industries may not really be able to understand. So I took all those learnings and that knowledge and those resources and I tailored it to the ag industry. And I know that there are other people within the ag space who do what I do, but obviously we come at it from very different angles, right? Like I know some other people who focus on the leadership side. I know some other people who focus on the executive coaching. I know some other people who focus on just like the mental health piece. And I would say I kind of sit at the crossroads of all of the above. And so the crossroads or the intersection of both your personal and your professional growth is where I like to hang out. And it's ever changing, it's ever evolving. So to say that I've got it nailed down or figured out will never happen. But I think it's one of those things that's like, not only is technology in the ag industry ever evolving, but so are our mindsets, so are the way that we're going about things. And so that's kind of where I like to hang out, is the crossroads of both of those.
So, Kacee, I think it's fascinating because I work in the tech industry, and so we have things like benefits for coaching, which I've done a couple sessions of, and they were good, but it's the ag part of coaching is so important when you are an ag person, because the coaches I've worked with have been very much like, well, you need to take more stuff off your plate. And like, either people or animals will literally starve if I take anything else off my plate. Like, we're really at the limit of what I can give up, or they'll say, well, you need to take a vacation. Like, well, even if I take a vacation, my husband can't, and we have 2 little kids, and it seems really uncool to be like, peace out, bro, I'll be back in 2 weeks. Have fun. Like, that seems rude. And I know that a lot of us struggle with the older generation saying, well, I never had help. I never took a vacation. And I try really hard to remind myself that they're generally not saying, I didn't do this and you shouldn't either. What they're saying is, I'm glad that things have changed enough that you can, but it can be really hard to separate that in your head when you're already feeling guilty about leaving your kids at home. And then somebody's like,
And depending on the farm, they might actually be saying, I didn't do that and you shouldn't either. So yeah, we're lucky. Yeah, I think that Katie and I, we know each other well enough to know that we're both lucky in that we have in-laws who are supportive of us, taking breaks and doing things like that. But yeah, it wasn't a life that they had. But depending on the farm, there may also be that other generation who's saying, why are you leaving and what for? Yeah. Or why are you investing in yourself, or those types of things. I've been thinking about the fact that farmers in particular, the people who are involved in primary agriculture, are maybe less likely to kind of invest in personal growth or professional development, at least in a conscious way. I mean, I think, lots of us in the wintertime are going to courses, or, people are offering programs, and you look at it as like, oh, it's a free lunch, and so I'll go. And I mean, really, we are also motivated enough to go there because we want to learn something, but we don't maybe look at it as, professional development necessarily. But why do you think it's important for farmers to develop in those areas, as well as people who are maybe on a more traditional, like corporate track?
Yeah, I steer not clear of the corporate employees, because I would say every single one of my employees or clients are farmers, except for like probably 2, right? They are professionals in the ag industry in a business. But I like to hang out with the farmers because they're the ones who don't have the resources, right? Like, they don't have an internal coaching or training system. They don't have the health benefits, right? Like, this is something that they're consciously having to choose. And I don't want to work with people whose boss told them they have to work with me, right? Like, I want to work with people who truly are ready to say, I want to make a change because I'm tired of living the way that I'm living, or I'm tired of feeling the way that I'm feeling. And so, Katie, you made a great point of like, sometimes I can't take anything off my plate. Like, if you don't have someone who understands what they're going through, it's not actually going to make things better. It might make things worse, and they're going to feel even worse about their situation. And so I think a lot of the times, like, I don't necessarily need to provide a solution to anybody. Sometimes they just need somebody to talk to. Now, I will say I'm not a therapist. I am not a counselor by any means. And so there is a big difference. And I always make sure that we understand the difference, like the definitions between those roles before we get started. But I think it's so important for the ag industry to invest in themselves because, being in the ag industry 14, 15 years professionally, I saw how much money was invested into machinery invested into their crops or fertilizer, into technology, into new buildings, into drainage systems. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars at the minimum, right? Just to do an upgrade. But you won't spend, a couple thousand or a couple $100 on your own well-being. And I just think it's so important because like, if you're not there, then why, like, what's the point, right? Like, I know so many people who like talk about succession planning and they're working to build this legacy. And it's like, but if that person doesn't want the farm, what are you working so hard for? Right? Like, wouldn't it be great to be able to talk this out before you've spent your entire life savings, before you've spent your entire life building something that somebody else doesn't want? Or wouldn't you like to plan this out really strategically? So like making sure that you're putting the right, maybe you've got 4 kids and you put one in the, in the office to do the operational side or the books, and then you got one out in the field doing the operational, like just being able to communicate that and just say, you know what, I'm not so proud that I'm just going to start assigning things. I'm willing to like swallow my pride for a second and say like, well, what do you want on this farm? And it's just a basic, like having conversations with people. It's like, wouldn't that be worth spending some money on yourself to work with a coach to be able to save your relationship with your kids, or to be able to work towards something that is worth building, right? Like I know so many people who I lost a sister in 2023 at 40 years old. And it's like, she didn't get to use up her 401k. She didn't get to use her vacation time. She left a kid at home. Like, all those things. It's like, life is just so, so short. And it's like, if you're going to spend money on something, why wouldn't you want it to directly benefit you? And knowing what the suicide rate is amongst farmers and ranchers, knowing how much of an issue that our mental health is in this industry, like, why wouldn't you make this teeny tiny drop in the bucket investment into yourself that could save you so much headache and heartache in the long run? But it's like so easy for you to drop $1 million on a new combine. You know what I mean? Like, to me, it just seems like a no-brainer. But again, it's this, one, I don't have time to meet with a coach, or I can figure it out on my own, or I've lasted 50 years. I can tough it out another 10 until if I retire, right? Like, I get it. I totally get it. Some people you're not ever going to be able to convince that this could be beneficial and life-changing for you. And then there's other people who are like, I didn't know that this existed. Where were you 15 years ago? And I get that so often, especially right after I do a keynote or a workshop. The older people in the crowd start off with their arms crossed, right? Like they've kind of got that scowl on their face, like, what's this girl going to teach me that I don't already know? And then by the end of it, they come up to me in tears. Yeah, they'll come up to me afterwards and they're like, oh my gosh, I never thought about it that way before. Or I can't believe that I let this go on for so long that, like the work-life balancing is a big piece, right? Like taking a vacation or making sure that you go to at least half of your son's basketball games during harvest, right? Like I know so many people who've kind of been in the older generation who said, I can't go back and change time. I regret this, but what I can do is now I have some tools and I know how to have the conversation with my adult son so he doesn't make the same mistake that I did when he was a kid. So I think it's super, super important. But again, it's not talked about. I mean, I'm one person and it's really difficult for me to voice this. And I don't want to convince anybody, but just to show how powerful it can be to just even have an hour-long conversation about this could just be like, oh my gosh, I never thought about that before. You've completely changed my perspective.
I think too, it can be so important to have therapy and coaching that is both ag informed and ag focused, because too, you deal with things like there's sort of that perspective of, well, wouldn't it be easier if you quit farming? Of course it would be easier. It would be so much easier if we both only had town jobs and didn't have cattle and weren't living in a house that's almost 120 years old and weren't, paying vet bills and paying for this and this and this, that's not who we are. About once a year, one of us will say, maybe we should quit. And then we just kind of stare at each other, and that's the end of the conversation, because nobody can conceive of what that would be like. But to an absolutely no judgment on anyone, we all have things that we do that we know are ridiculous, and we probably should cut out, like the snapping turtle costume, that mean enough that we're going to do it anyway. And focusing on how we can make that happen, even when it is ridiculous, and how to know which things are ridiculous that you can get off your plate and which things are ridiculous that are important. Yeah, I feel like I just went full circle and I didn't actually ask a question at all.
That's okay. There's a question for you on the script if you want to look at it.
I could try that.
There you go.
She does have a question here for me. I don't think I even asked her about this yesterday, so she must just be psychic. One of the areas you work on a lot is burnout and life balance. And it's probably bad that I say that like it's a mythical creature. I don't really believe in balance, but okay. How do we find some sort of, I'm trying not to say balance since I just said I don't believe in it, reasonable way to approach things so that we're not only doing one thing and then just dropping everything else on the other side? I feel like a lot of us, and Krista, please feel free to just edit out 90% of what I have just said. I feel like we tend to picture this work-life balance thing as like a seesaw, that it only goes two directions. And I'm realizing that it feels a lot more like one of those spinning plates on a stick, that it's got, 50 things around the edge and you're trying to balance all of them. Because I don't know anybody who's like, work life is a pretty reductive thing. Like, life isn't one. Arlene, this is too far into my feelings today.
That's all right. Let Kacee talk. I feel like she's got some things.
Let me help. I think I know where you're going with this.
Podcasts are free to listen to, but they aren't free to create. Katie and I would appreciate your support as we work to build the Barnyard Language community.
Patreon is an easy way for you to make a contribution that goes directly to making the show. As a member of our Patreon community, you get to watch the video version of our weekly updates, complete with questionable hairstyles and clutter. With 3 levels of support, you can choose a tier that works for you.
Keep the podcast going by becoming a patron today at patreon.com/barnyardlanguage.
So especially within the ag industry, right? Because the way that we earn an income is the thing that we do all day, every day. And most of the time it's right alongside our family. And so there's not really a line, right? So if you were to say, we're going to look at the scale and here's the way that we earn an income and here's the things that we do when we're not earning an income, it's really difficult to understand that there is a difference. There's a big blurry line, if you can even recognize that there's a line. Totally understand that. And again, emphasizing the need for a coach or a therapist or a counselor who understands that, right? Because it could make things way worse if they don't and they're trying to help you with it. So I recognize that. But what I think the myth is that so many people believe or think that work-life balance means you've got work over here and life over here. What I think work-life balance is, or how I refer to it, is not we need to find the balance of an equal, we've got 50 over here or 50 over here, or even 100 over here and 100 over here, right? It's not necessarily that. So I want you to just kind of like take that thought or that mindset and just table it for a second and try on the thought that work-life balance is actually putting the right amount of time, attention, resources, and energy into the right thing at the right time. And that scale or that measurement can be in fluctuation constantly. Throughout the day, that's going to look different. Throughout the week, throughout the season, throughout the year, throughout years, meaning season of life, right? So like my balance as a parent is going to look very different in the first few years of my daughter's life than it did in the summer of 2022, right? Or what it's going to look like in another couple of years. So I like to have people just like erase what you think you know about what work-life balance actually means and just think about where your priorities need to be. And in the morning, it needs to be focused on this. And in the afternoon, it needs to be focused on that. And giving yourself full permission to be right there where your feet are. That is what I would like for people to think about as work-life balance, and just get rid of this like notion or expectation or pressure to have things look equal. That's bullcrap. It's not going to happen. It's exhausting and it's unrealistic. But where do we need to put the right amount of attention, time, energy, and resources into the right things at the right time? And again, that's going to look all over the place, all day, every day. And it's going to look completely different for everyone. What my husband's work-life balance is going to look very different than mine. We have different responsibilities. We have different personalities. We have different priorities throughout the day, right? And so just know that that is a very unique thing that's special to you. And you can't expect anybody else to understand that, let alone be able to like tell you this is what the ideal thing is. So I will never be able to say, here's what your ideal work-life balance is, 60% this, 40% that. It's just not a thing. But what I think a healthy approach would be is to say, where do I need to focus right here, right now? And I'm going to give myself full permission to focus on that thing there. And so if we're going to talk about like work-life balance, let's just use, I'm going to use an example as a professional in the ag industry, and then I'm going to use a farmer or rancher example afterwards. So the first one would be like, let's just say I'm a seed salesman. And I know that for me, the busy season is going to be mid-harvest through the winter, right? And then delivery of the seed come February, March, maybe April-ish. And then we've got planting. And then the summer is pretty slow for us. Maybe not slow, right? I don't know if things actually go slow, but it's less hectic or chaotic. And I probably have a little bit more flexibility in my time. So I know, like, for example, when I was selling seed, I was very busy during conference season in the winter, and I was making sure that I was on farm in the winter, but then I was in the field planting plots during the springtime, which just happens to be baseball season, right? And so there were unfortunately several times where I had to miss my son's baseball game. And how I could be proactive in that is just really saying to him, hey, I know that I want to be there. I don't want to miss this, but right now I have this very short, small window that I have to get this work done. My boss is counting on me. My clients are counting on me. I have to get this stuff in the field. I have to get these seeds delivered. Unfortunately, I'm not going to make it to this game or this game, but after that, I'm going to try like hell to be there. So just setting clear expectations and knowing in this season of my life, that has to take priority. Now, obviously, that was what I decided was my boundary. That's a whole different conversation we can get into further about missing out on stuff like that. But let's just put the shoe on the farmer for a quick second. Let's just say, I've been working alongside my dad, who's in his late 70s, and I'm 55 years old, and I don't want to miss my son's basketball game in the middle of harvest, right? Like, I know that I have a very short window to get that crop out of the ground. Winter could come, some kind of bad weather could knock it all down. The markets might be a factor. Unfortunately, during that time, if you're looking at the scale, right, work is taking priority. But there are some things that you can do to find that little balance to make sure that you're paying attention to your family, right? Like maybe you schedule, hey, I know Thursday night he's got a game. I'm going to be out of the field for 2 hours. And so that's the balance that I'm trying to find to make sure I'm giving my family the attention they need. 2 hours more than likely isn't going to make or break the harvest. You know what I mean? Like just make it to one game if you can, right? Like just to make sure that we're finding the balance, putting the right amount of time and energy and resources into the right things at the right time. And for those 2 hours, I'm going to be fully present at my kid's game. I'm not going to give myself permission to answer the phone because like, hey, we need you here. I'm going to be right there where my feet are, right? And so again, this is I might have some listeners saying, this girl doesn't know what the hell she's talking about. Like, that sounds great, but that's not reality. This is a very high level example. And in order for me to best serve you, I would need to know all the pieces to be able to help you, right? But that's just kind of give you an example of like, there can be balance even during the busy season, but there's some things that you're going to have to take into consideration. And maybe that does mean that you give up going to the Suns baseball game. Maybe that does mean that you don't get to go to the basketball games, right? But on Saturdays and Sundays or whenever, or when it's the harvest season is done, you give them your full undivided attention. And again, I say this loosely because I know there's a lot of other examples. So this isn't a one size fit all solution. This is just me kind of giving you an example that you guys can say, I want to give my family attention here, or I know that I need to change my mindset. Maybe I can't change the actual actions, but maybe I can give myself permission and grace and work through the mindset that I have around this too. So maybe you actually can't take anything off your plate, but you can work on your mindset around how you feel about it. Like, I am doing this because, or I know that I'm doing this when blah, 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 right? So there's a lot of things that you could go down the rabbit hole on. But again, I think that the reason so many people like you, Katie, have a bad taste in your mouth around that term is that the expectations are they're false. You're never going to be able to succeed on that. So we think it's just this elusive thing. So we just say, to heck with it. There's no such thing. When actually, I think if we just like rewrite the definition of what that is, it can be a little bit more achievable.
I think that's probably a lot of it is that my actual therapist pointed out that I'm kind of a crazy perfectionist, which probably comes as a shock to anyone who's seen the state of my office. But I am a very all or nothing kind of person. And so I think that work-life balance certainly falls under that. Well, I should be able to do 110% of all of these things, and maybe nobody else can do 110% of all of these things, but I probably could, and that's A, it's nuts, and B, it ends up holding other people to your false expectations of yourself. And I don't want my kids to grow up thinking that they should be able to do 110% of everything at all times and, making themselves crazy doing it. But it is...
They can, but it's not a long-term strategy.
Yeah. I think that's a lot of it, is that it's hard to break back out of that emergency mode into, how do you determine how long is reasonable for emergency mode on something before you really have to take a step back and reassess what the hell you're doing?
I think everybody's got a different threshold there. I think that, for some people, hey, I might be able to just put my head down and go for months and it be fine. And then there's other people who need to reassess daily, right? Like, I've been sitting in front of the computer all day long doing my thing. I gotta just take the rest of the afternoon off, right? Like, everybody's got different thresholds. And I think all the other outside factors can determine what that is too, right? They can play a part in that depending on what else is on your plate. But I don't think anybody should just be surviving, right? Like, we're not here to just be in emergency mode and just gazelle all the time. I think we're here to actually remember to live life. And I think this is where so many people in agriculture are just like, what do you mean? What do you actually mean? I don't get it. What do you mean? And I think for so long, we thought that hard work meant showing up wore out, covered in grease, and just completely depleted. And if we didn't, then we didn't do enough, or it didn't count. And I think we have to just take 500 steps back and say, one, what am I working so hard for? And two, what's my definition of success? And again, that can be a whole nother conversation, but I don't think that it's wrong to work hard, but I think it doesn't have to look the same for everybody all the time, or it doesn't count. Working hard can be sitting down and using your brain instead of your body. working hard can mean 2 hours of really intense work versus 12-hour shifts, right? Like, I think that it can differ. And I think we just have to let go of these boxes or these check marks or these preconceived notions of what things actually mean and say, what does it mean to me? Am I doing enough? Am I meeting my own expectations? Am I showing up and getting the work done that I set out to do, right? If I had completed my work by noon, does that mean I can take the afternoon off, or does that mean I have to go find something else to do, right? Like, I remember all growing up, if my dad caught me laying on the couch, oh, I just thought it, like, the world would end. Like, as soon as I heard the garage door open, I'd jump off the couch and made it look like I was doing something because I didn't want him to think I was lazy or unproductive. And I think so many of us carry those conditionings and those beliefs about ourselves, like we're not doing enough, or we're lazy if we don't do X, or we fail if we don't show up this way. And that's the type of work that I do with clients, is kind of just help them reprogram and recondition and say, well, what are you working so hard for? Why can't you take a vacation? Is it because there's literally nobody to delegate this to? Or is it because you have a control problem where you don't feel good enough bringing somebody else into it? Now, again, those are just two very broad examples, but let's figure out why you actually can't take a vacation. And I'm sure that we can come up with something other than we just can't. Like, let's really figure out why.
This really speaks to me, and if you guys could see my text messages from yesterday, every single message I sent yesterday was about being overwhelmed and burned out, and what the hell do you do when you're so overwhelmed and burned out that you can't figure out how to stop being overwhelmed and burned out? Because that is one more fucking thing you would have to think about. And just, in my job and in farming and in parenting and probably most other jobs too, a large part of my job is creativity and problem solving. And for me, at least, those are the first two things to go out the window when all hell is breaking loose and you're just trying to keep people alive, is that ability to, you have to be able to relax your brain to have new ideas and to fix things. You can't do it when your brain is just spinning and spinning and spinning. And I really wish we gave ourselves and each other more room to just say, I'm done for today. By Wednesday this week, I was like, I should be able to just call a mulligan on the whole week and just take a do-over, because finally some things kind of broke loose and got fixed. But the first half of this week, I was just like, there's no point in even trying to keep doing this shit, because it's just getting worse, because you get...
And for reference, we're recording this on Friday, and I feel like this is what Katie needed today. So this is amazing.
Yes. Sorry. Like having a real moment.
No, I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm saying that this is where we needed to be today.
I also have started writing a lot of affirmations in my planner, which is very much not a me thing. But I realize that anybody who's snooping in my planner deserves to find out horrifying things about me. And how much it can feel, especially I think in farm communities, like no one else is ever struggling and no one else has ever had this problem. And I think that's a lot of our problem with getting mental health help. And also, like with my stuff at work, it took 4 other people to fix the problem. So it wasn't a Katie problem. It was just a problem, and finding out which of these things is just needs more help. And I think that's where coaching and therapy can really, come in handy, is when, to have an outside source say, no, that's actually a problem. That's not a you thing. That's just wrong. So once again, I've managed not to ask any questions.
That's all right.
I always like to say, though, like, who's keeping score? Like, is anybody watching your life that closely? Like you said, if anybody's in my planner, then what? Like, they shouldn't be there anyway. Like, but nobody's keeping score.
Yeah, like feel free to check off a couple items while you're in there, dude.
Yes. And this was something I really struggled with when I left corporate America and started my own business, right? I had that employee mindset. Like, I have to work from 8 to 5, and I'm only allowed to have a 30-minute lunch break from 12 to 12:30. And I have to sit in front of my computer. Otherwise, like, it doesn't count, right? Like, I had to break the employee mindset. And now, I mean, you might find me working at 9 p.m. and not do anything else during the rest of like the day, because that's just what I want my schedule to look like. And I have the freedom and flexibility. But listen, no one's keeping track. No one's keeping score. No one is rating you or saying you didn't do a good enough job today. And something that I always like to say, like, if you are burnt out, if you feel like your work-life balance is out of whack, do the stop, drop, and roll method. What do you do when you're on fire, right? Like, if you're just feeling like you're crazy right now, stop, drop, and roll. Stop, take a moment, pause, assess the situation, drop the ego, drop the tasks, and just kind of like roll with what makes sense right now. Roll tasks to people. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Roll responsibilities off. Like, our kids can actually do more chores than we make them do, right? Like, my 1-year-old carried the laundry basket from her room to the laundry room. Like, she helped me put the Tupperware away, right? Like, she's 1. We can ask more from our kids than we probably are. And I'm not saying that everybody has kids, right? But like, there are people in our lives. There's no shame in hiring a house cleaner during planting and harvest or branding season, for example, right? Like, it's okay to delegate those things out for a season.
Or all year. I'm a big fan of house cleaners.
Yeah. Like, there's no shame in that. No shame at all.
I really liked what you were saying before too about what are you building your legacy for? And if it's for you, then that's okay. But if it's for someone else, whether that's an ancestor or a child, you have to think about whether or not your actions are about you or about what you think that they want you to do or what you think that someone else would want your farm to look like. Or because so much of that, we can go really far into the, well, this is the way it's always been, which is not true, because all farms change, and this is what my kids are going to want, which we don't know because they're children. And whether they're 18 or 2, you can't, as much as we want to live our lives in support of our kids, we can't live our lives for our children, and our farms can't be that either, right? If you're the one working there every day, then you have to decide, is this what you want to be doing every day? So I really like the idea of looking into the word that you have on your website is cultivate purpose. Like, what's the purpose, and what's your purpose individually, and what is the purpose of your farm or your business or any of those kinds of things. But really look into what are your motivations and why are you doing what you do, and maybe that is where you can find some flexibility to be like, oh, that thing that I'm doing every year or is because I feel like I should do it. It's because, grandpa did it, grandma did it, whatever. Or, but is that something that we need to continue doing? Are there exercises or kind of specific things that, say someone has a call with you or decides they want to work with you? I think sometimes people are afraid until they kind of know, like, what is she going to make me do? I mean, I think our conversation is kind of an example of some of the things you're going to push people on, but like, are there things that in terms of homework or like, or actual activities you want people to kind of like really explore when they're working with you, so someone has an idea of what they're getting into?
I don't really have like prep work. And I'm not a big fan of homework. I homeschool my son for a reason, right? Like, I'm not a big homework fan. Like, I'm 34 years old. Like, I don't need somebody to assign me crap after hours. Like, I'm not putting myself in the position where if I decide I don't want to do homework, I'm going to let my teacher down or my coach down. Like, but there are some clients of mine who need that accountability, or who want hey, give me something to do tonight while I'm doing whatever, right? Like, so I think it just depends on the client. I have both male and female clients, and every single one of them is very unique in their own way. They all have different goals. They have all different reasons for joining coaching. Some of them are very intentional and strategic every single week. And then others are just like, this is what I'd like to talk about today, right? And let's just see where the conversation goes from here. And so What I always like to tell people is I'm not your boss. I'm not your spouse. I'm not your counselor. I'm literally here to help you. And if you don't want it, it's okay. If you're not ready for it, it's okay. And that's why I always like to say, like, I don't want to work with somebody who feels like they have to work with me. Like, I'm only here to help. And I can be as intense and on you as you need, or I can be kind of as hands off and just here when you need me. And that's the perk of being your own boss, is you get to decide how you want to run your business. And so I think it just depends on the client. But if somebody was like, hey, how can I get a taste for what working with you looks like? I mean, you can just book a one-off session if you want to. I have a pick my brain session where it's just like, I just want to pay for 60 minutes of your time, and we just go as hard or as light as you need to. And talking about your goals, I'll give you every access to all of my resources or contacts if you need to. And so that kind of is where people start typically. Either they come to a webinar, or they see me speak somewhere, or they realize like, oh, so-and-so also works with them, so they can get some taste like that. But no, it just really depends on the client. And I think that that's really important too, is to realize like, it's not cookie cutter coaching here. Like, every single conversation is different. Every single week is different. Every single client is different. And that's the beauty of this, is to be able to work with somebody who's like, I want to tailor our conversations to you, not what is everybody in the ag industry facing, or here's this curriculum that I have to follow during the 6 months that you sign up. Like, I do have a curriculum inside of AgriMinds, which is like the group coaching, but for one-on-one coaching clients, it's very unique to you.
That's really good to hear. So do you want to talk a little bit about some of those resources and what AgriMinds is and those types of things, so people kind of have an idea of the different options that you have available?
Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of power in working one-on-one, like super focused on you, right? Like, I've got your full attention. We can customize what we talk about to really just hone in on you. But then there are some people who are like, I want the community. I want to be able to grow alongside somebody else. I want some more structure and, kind of more broad of a topic, which is what AgriMinds is. So AgriMinds is that 12-week group coaching program. And basically we follow this workbook. We talk about all the things. We talk about habits. We talk about mindsets. We talk about leadership. We talk about your personal growth plan. We talk about some goals that you have. We talk about the working genius, which is similar to DISC or Myers-Briggs, right? We plug that in there. That's my favorite personality assessment, by the way. And really figure out, like, are you setting these goals because that's what your friend did, or your spouse wants you to do, or your parents did, so that's what you're doing? Or are these actually aligned with what you want to do? And Katie, you actually mentioned something a second ago of like, these are the two things that I like to do. I like to come up with ideas, or I like to do this, like the creativity piece, right? How can we align the work that you're doing, like the way that you're earning an income, with the things that give you joy and energy and kind of like make you happy and energized, right? And if we can't do that in your daytime job, how can we figure out how to do that after hours in your personal time off? And so we make sure to incorporate that as well inside of AgriMinds. But like I said, I work with people inside of AgriMinds, which there's another round every quarter. So depending on when you listen to this episode, there may be one open right now, or you can just visit my website and figure out when the next one is. And then obviously working one-on-one as well. And I can kind of create a package that works for you and your timeline and your budget. Again, that's the perk of having your own business, is I don't have to say like, this is your option. It's either yes or no. It's what do we need to do to make this work? Right. So,
Kacee, I think that's so great, because I know for myself, at least, I'm in tech, and my last, annual review said, you do such great, like, coming up with new ideas. So we need you to just come up with new ideas all the time. It was like, but
No pressure.
it was like you could hear the record scratch in my brain. It was every creative thought I have ever had screeching to a halt and like falling out my ear at the very idea of like required innovation. Like, no pressure, but we're going to need 27 brilliant new ideas by Thursday. And 99 point
But that's also your interpretation, right?
99.8% of that is totally me just freaking out over nothing. But having time and a commitment to reflect on what you're actually doing and what you need to actually be able to do the things you're doing is huge. And I think that's one of the real benefits of having, especially honestly, having paid someone to talk to, is that if I've given you money, my money's already gone, so I might as well like actually do the thing and put some thought into it and like,
Maybe trust the individual that you hired to give you advice.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's the one. So Kacee, I think we're going to switch over into our parenting stuff, which we've already kind of gone into a little bit, but maybe in a more intentional way. We often ask people to reflect on the time when they first became parents and how life changed and the things they learned about themselves. So I was wondering about that time for you, which sounds like it was about 8 years ago. And then how did life also change then when you added a second to your family?
Boy, this is a story. So, my husband and I actually went to college together, and I graduated a semester ahead of him. So I'm from Indiana. He's from over by St. Louis. We both went to school in Southern Illinois. So we both kind of like met in the middle, right? And we dated a little bit in college. And then since I graduated ahead of him, I was like, bye, like, great knowing you. Hasta la vista, right? So I moved back home to the farm, had full intention of taking over the farm one day, right? I'm one of 4 daughters, 3 now, and really just wanted to be the daughter that took over the farm. Since I didn't have any brothers and none of my sisters really wanted anything to do with the farm, I just thought it was a natural succession or transition into me. And I get here back to the farm and realized very quickly that maybe people aren't as open to my ideas as I thought they were going to be. Like, I was this young, educated person, like the first one in my family to really like have this level of degree and do something with it. Like, my oldest sister had a degree in art and then worked at a coffee shop, right? Like, so I was like thinking, oh my gosh, like, I'm brilliant. Listen to all of my ideas. And I had a very rude awakening. And so when my dad said, you have champagne taste on a well water budget, like, we can't even afford beer for you right now. Like, you're on a well water budget. You need to probably go figure out how to earn some income. And so I worked at our local John Deere dealership as the parts girl and also farmed on top of that. And so I was, making chains and filling battery acid and delivering parts and blah, blah, blah. And then farming as soon as I got home. And I, remember like falling asleep on my couch with my boots still on, covered in battery acid. Like, I just was so wore out. And I was like, there's no way that this is what life should look like at 22, 23 years old, right? Like, I'm pooped. Like, I'm so exhausted. And so I did that for about 3 years. And 2 years into that, my husband and I found each other again. We ran into each other one New Year's. And I was like, okay, I think this might turn back into something. And so I ended up getting a job at corporate John Deere, which moved me to Missouri. And so this was January of 2015, ran into my husband again. And well, obviously not husband at the time. And I was like, hey, I'm moving to Missouri. Like, I'm going to be a lot closer to you. And so I traveled for a living. That was my job, is to manage all the different John Deere dealerships within a specific territory. And I did that from January to May. And in May, I guess it was October. In October, I found out I was pregnant. So my husband and I hadn't even really been dating like a full year officially. And I found out I was pregnant, and I still lived 2.5 hours away from him. And so here I had gone through leaving college, coming back home, thinking I'm going to take over the farm, to realizing I don't have a shot in hell to take over the farm, finding what I thought was this like really dream job. Like, I'm working for corporate John Deere. There was so much pride and like perks and all the things that came with that. And then not even a year into this new dream job, I found out I'm pregnant. And so I really just went into this really deep, dark state, right? Depressed, like, I'm not married. I what am I going to do? Like, I can't travel for a living and raise a baby on my own because I still live 2.5 hours away from the baby daddy. Like, there was just so much going on. And so my husband was like, yeah, I'll move to Colombia and we'll live together and we'll figure this out. And so we actually didn't get married until our son was about 2-ish years old. And so the first 2 years of life was just kind of figuring out, like, okay, I guess I'm going to have to leave my job and find something that doesn't require me to travel. So I left my dream job to find something local and hated my job. I worked in an office and crunched numbers and really just so far removed from agriculture and trying to figure out how to raise a baby and 5.5 hours away from my parents. Like, it was a hot mess. Like, it was not what anybody like dreamed up of how you should feel when you have your first child. Like, I didn't get to experience marriage. I didn't get to experience the honeymoon. I didn't get to experience, just being surrounded by friends and family and having that whole, what we think life is going to look like when you're in that season. And so it was really in a dark spot, if I'm completely honest with you. And right around the time that my husband and I decided to get married, we moved back to Indiana. So we're about 3 miles from my parents. And I thought, again, okay, this is our chance, right? Like, my grandpa had passed away. My dad and my mom were running the farm full time. And I'm like, my husband and I are going to take over the farm. We're going to work with them. It turns out they're not ready for us still. So my husband gets a job and he's working the night shift. And here I am helping, helping during the busy season, and also working full time, traveling a little bit over here. And I was like, okay, we finally got this groove, right? Like, Hudson, my son, he's a school age and I can work during the day and farm in the evening. He'll just play on the floorboard of the tractor, whatever. And, then, just we faced a lot of different personal things in our marriage, and it was just really hard. And then I got offered this opportunity to work for Bayer at the time. And I was like, this is okay. I'm finally back into like a dream job. Like, I don't have to travel, the perks, the money is great. I started there in, it was either January or December of 2022. And then in March, I found out I was pregnant with baby number 2. And I was like, God, like, as soon as you think things are going to go well, as soon as you think things are finally falling into place and like you got your bearings again, life happens. And so then baby number 2 happened and I was like, crap, like, what am I going to do? So I finished out working with them. I went on maternity leave. And while I was on maternity leave, I was helping my family with harvest, wrapping things up with that. And we had like a nesting period. And so I didn't actually have the baby yet, but I was on maternity leave. And I remember one night I was like, I'm just going to see if I can grow this coaching business idea that I had, right? Like, I always had this idea that I could do it, but I never did anything with it. And so while I was on maternity leave, I just like built a website and put some feelers out there. And I ended up making a shit ton of money while I was on maternity leave. And I was like, if I could make this much money while I'm having a brand new baby in the middle of winter, surely I could do something with this. And so in May of 2023 or 2020, what year is it? I don't even know. 2024, 2023. I left and I basically said, hey mom, hey dad, I'm going to do this thing over here. And if you need me, I'll be available. But I'm kind of just giving up on the idea that you're going to have me around to be on the farm. Like, we live 3 miles away from you and you never call me. I have to call you to see where you guys are at and if you need help. And so I'm just like letting you know I'm starting my own business and I'm here if you need me. And it's been about a year, right? And things have been great. And about half a year ago, my dad ended up telling me, he's just like, I'm just super proud of you for doing this. And I was like, but why don't you want me to farm? Like, I was just in one of those moods where I was just like, but why don't you want me with you? Like, am I not good enough? Like, do I need to be a boy? Like, what? Like, why don't you want me to farm? I just don't get it. Like, I have put myself out here. I've moved back to Indiana. I've tried everything to try to like build this plan with you. Like, why don't you want me here? And he's just like, oh, it's not like that at all. And I was like, well, then tell me, because I'm pissed. Like, I've changed my life around twice. I've moved away. I've come back. Like, I'm trying to, like, I just don't get it. Like, all I wanted was to come home and farm. And I just feel like you keep pushing me away. And he's like, Kacee, I don't think you get it. Like, I don't want you here because I don't want you to experience the crap that I've experienced. And I was like, well, what do you mean? I was like, didn't you want to be a farmer? And he's like, hell no. If I were to do it over again, there's no way I would do this. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, we're fourth generation farmers. Like, this is what you wanted to do, right? And he goes, no. I wanted you to get out of here. I wanted you to have a real world experience. I wanted you to experience having a 401k and health insurance that you didn't have to pay for out of your own pocket. And I wanted you to go learn stuff. I wanted you to have a life where you weren't under somebody's thumb your entire life getting barked orders at. And no, your idea doesn't count. You have to do things my way. He's like, I wanted you to get out of here. I was like, well, why didn't you just say that? Right. And obviously, like, it's not something that people talk about. Like, you can't imagine somebody who looks like my dad to have a conversation about feelings, first of all, but to admit out loud to their daughter that he felt like he was going to fail me if he allowed me to stay at the farm. Like, that's just not a really easy conversation. And so I had no idea that he didn't actually want to farm. Like, that's all he's ever known was farming. And turns out that's not at all where his dreams or his passions or his skills really wanted him. Like, that's where he was. And so I spent, 33 years of my life wondering why I wasn't good enough to farm with him when actually he felt like he was protecting me. And so my farming journey has really just been all over the place. I mean, if you look at things through my perspective versus through my dad's perspective, like, we were totally in different books. And so now, like, my parents still farm together. One of my sisters helps out during planting and harvest, and I help out planting and harvest as well. But now we just have different expectations of, like, okay, I'm not a burden to them now. I'm not like, not helpful, because I thought if I didn't show up, then they wouldn't survive. Like, they need me, right? Like, it was like this really weird in between of, like, do you not want me here or do you need me here? And it was just so confusing. And now we have a much better conversation around, like, okay, I don't need you all day, but I do need you to help us move trucks. So if you can help me for like 30 minutes, it would be so helpful for us. And so we have a much different conversation, and we're still figuring out what life is going to look like when they decide to retire. They may decide to sell out. It's not something that my husband and I can afford to take over right now. And so I think just letting go of the expectation and the pressure that I have to take on the farm because all the generations ahead of me have built something. And if I don't take it on, then I've somehow let down my ancestors. But now I'm actually like, I know that I wasn't born to be a farmer, and that's okay. I thought that I had to do that, but now I realize, like, I don't have to at all. And there are people still my age and younger that want to be a farmer. So it's not on my shoulders. The weight of the world to feed the world is not my responsibility. And I have to be okay with that. I can't go on anymore living my life thinking if I don't carry on this torch, I've somehow just, like, my purpose in life is gone. And I realized, like, that was really hard for me to accept. And I think so many people in agriculture, mostly men, I know there are other women who farm, but typically, and this is not me being like gender, whatever, I'm not like some feminist, but, like, to be honest with you, just mostly men, mostly sons take over the farm. And this isn't something that they necessarily always think about, right? Like, I know people my age and younger who their dad said, like, you got to come over and take it over, or, you got to go find something else to do. And I just don't think we know how to have the conversation of what's actually the right thing to do and how do we do it. And we just feel like we have this responsibility, and it's like this unspoken responsibility that you've been tasked with. And it's like, actually, no wonder you're burnt out. No wonder you're struggling, because you're trying to fill the shoes and the role of something that somebody else wanted you to do, but you don't know how to recognize it or give it a name, let alone talk about it. So that was a very scenic route to your question.
I love this idea of how different things would be if we talked about legacy openly with each other. If the older generation could come to the younger generation and say, this is what I see as my legacy. Is this what you want? what do you want as your legacy? And if the younger generation could say, this is what I see as what you're passing on, is this what you want me to be having? Is this what you want to be passing on? And if we could just have that conversation, I mean, it's real crazy, but if we could just talk openly about our feelings and our hopes and our dreams and what it must be like, for your dad and for so many people, especially of that generation, where they've worked this hard for something they didn't want. I mean, this is a hard damn life. If you love it and you want it and this is all you've ever wanted, it is still so hard. And I cannot imagine working this hard for this long, especially with the 80s farm crisis and all of that, because I am older than you. And to just be building this legacy that you don't want to leave anybody because you don't want them stuck with the legacy you were stuck with. And how much happier all of us could be if we could just talk openly and not be ruled by the expectations of a bunch of dead people who may not have wanted this to be their legacy to us either.
Yeah, those other generations might have been feeling the same, right? If we have never had those conversations, then how do you know what your great great grandmother would have wanted you to do?
Well, they didn't have a choice.
When people say, well, so-and-so's mom had 12 kids and worked in town and farmed and milked cows and cooked everything on a wood stove, and she didn't have an option.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was how you survived.
Yeah, there's a lot of things there that were not a choice. And just, I'm gonna say it, and I hope no one comes after me with a pitchfork. My kids are 5th generation in this house, and that does mean a lot to us. It's just a house. It is just land. It is not, our family is more important than this house or the barn or the land or any of it. And that is something I remind myself of about 28 times a day as I'm, working furiously away to pay for the paint job on the house or the roof on the barn or whatever, that it's just a farm. It is not worth killing yourself over, literally or figuratively, and it is not worth destroying your family over.
And like you said, Kacee, I mean, it might be someone else's dream, and they would get to be the first generation of something new. And then, maybe that's something that they get to pass on to their kids or not, or whatever, right? It does, we have this like, there's this worship of, intergenerational transfer that, in some cases is great. But it doesn't have to be the only way. There are so many ways to farm, and there are so many ways to support young farmers and people who want to be involved in this industry, that we don't need to burden people who don't want to be in the industry with things that they don't want, and that then become their cross to bear for the rest of their life, right? I think that's such a gift that your dad gave you. I mean, like you said, it might have been nice to know in your 20s, but to know in your 30s rather than your 50s, that what he was trying to do was protect you from something. And maybe you can stand up, and maybe at that point would have been when you could say, well, thanks for trying to protect me, but what I do actually want to do is farm. But, at least you got to have that conversation as two people who, as adults can have that conversation. And he gave you time to figure out, along the way, what you were good at and what your passions were and all of those things.
Yeah. Well, and back to the first generation farmer thing, like there's a local farmer here who is the same age as my dad who didn't have any kids. And he's like, I've worked all my life to build up this farming operation. And he knew another farmer down in Kentucky, and they had a young guy working for him. And he said, hey, what would your interest be in, like, giving me one of your workers? They're interested in taking over a farm. I'd love to take him under my wing. And for the last 10 years, he's been teaching this. I think he started up there when he was in his 20s. Can I take this young guy underneath my wing? And now you've got this 30-year-old who didn't necessarily grow up on the farm, but is able to take over this other guy's farm, but not just because of a death or some kind of trauma. It was, I had this person teaching me. And I think that that is an option that so many people don't realize. Like, you can still build a legacy, but it doesn't necessarily have to go to blood, right? And I think that, Kacee, it's not just a house. It can mean something to you. It can be something where it's full of memories and it's sentimental. I don't think you have to black or white it. It doesn't have to be, I care or I don't. Like, it can be something more too, but it doesn't have to take the higher spot than the well-being of your children. Like, putting that house on the pedestal of saying, like, I care more about my house, this legacy of the house, than I do the well-being and the interests of my children. I think, like, that I view this as like a boyfriend, right? Like, you can still care about someone and love them and remember all the good times you had with them, and they not be the person you marry. And that's okay. There doesn't have to be some traumatic breakup. It doesn't have to be this huge fight or somebody cheated, right? Like, it's just not the long-term plan. And that's okay. And I think so many people in agriculture just view it as like the only exit is this really negative, traumatic thing. It's like, I can still love something and care about it and find passion in the farm and not take it over. That's okay.
I'm just picturing now if we treated relationships the way we do farms and we were all forced to marry the first person we dated.
Yikes.
That, like, you were born on this farm, you will die here. This is the first person you dated, you're married now. Good luck. And regarding that neighbor farmer...
Yeah, that's what we've done, though, for years.
Yeah. How cool is it that he gets to pass on his legacy to someone who loves it? And to be able to share that knowledge, and for a first generation farmer to get that knowledge and to be able to take over when it's a happy thing instead of it being, well, somebody's in the ground, oh shit, who's running this place? Because
yeah, let's get the will and figure out who's responsible now. Yeah.
We know a lot of folks like that, and that's not a legacy.
So reactive. Yeah, we're so reactive.
Yeah.
That's oh shit, what do we do?
Yeah, that's right. You mentioned a lot of the changes along the path of your career, and something we talk about a lot, and I know you've lived in different places, but is like how childcare works for different people and at different stages of life. So what has childcare and, farm life and business life and all that kind of stuff worked out to look like for your family over the years?
Oh, it's been crazy. So when we lived in Columbia, Missouri, it was a big town. I mean, Mizzou College, right? Like, lots of opportunities, lots of options. And so we had this place that was called the Sandlot, and it was the most amazing daycare. It was clean and organized, and they had the right amount of staff. And I mean, it just was like, oh my gosh, this is the best ever. Like, it set the bar for what I thought daycare looked like in the United States, right? Like, I was just obsessed with it, and I was like, this is amazing. And having yeah, and then also being in the college town, like, finding a sitter on a date night was so easy. Like, you could just get on your app and you could say, who's available Friday night, and here's how much I'm willing to pay you, and you'd have 7 suitors, right? Like, it was easy. Then we moved back to rural Indiana, where there's nothing, like, 0 options. And so thankfully Hudson was at the age where he could go into like it was like a pre-kindergarten. It wasn't preschool, but it kind of was like a preschool. And so thankfully we had that option with him. And, I know that I thought it was expensive, but then I was hearing about people in other states, and I was like, oh my gosh, our daycare is very, very affordable compared to other states. And then he just went into school. Right. And then when baby number 2 came, she came in December of 2022. I couldn't find anything. And I had been looking. The moment I found out I was pregnant, I started trying to look for a sitter or a daycare or something. 0 options. I mean, we only had like 6 options in the entire 3 counties that surrounded us, and they were all full. And so finally we found a girl that she was like a nursery worker at a church, and she was the pastor's wife, and she was like, yeah, I'm stepping down from the church. I'd be more than happy to watch her for a little while, like not a long-term thing. I'm talking like maybe for a couple months till you find something. So thankfully we had her. But yeah, she was like, okay, it's May. You need to be finding something out, which is another reason why I think the timing of me leaving my job was kind of expedited, right? Like I don't have another sitter. Like I have to leave. I have to figure out how to make money on my own. I don't have a sitter, so I can't go work. I can't go out of town. Like I have to figure out how to make this work. And so she stayed home with me for a little while. And then finally we found a girl who had an in-home daycare. And so she still goes there. She had an everyday during the week option, but we only send her 3 days a week. And since I started homeschooling back in May of this year, Hudson's home with me all day, every day. And then she's home with us 3 days a week. And so there's days like Fridays, right, where I can do customer calls or do things like this. And so otherwise she's home. But if I didn't have this daycare, I don't know what I would do. So my parents do help out, right? My son's at the farm right now, riding in the combine with my mom. So I had a full day today, and I was like, it's either he goes and sits at the sitters with a bunch of babies, or he's home sitting upstairs playing on his iPad all day, or he goes and farms with my mom. And so I stuck him in the combine with her. So we do have that flexibility that we didn't have when we were in Missouri. So it's just a whole different set. So like we had options over there, but we didn't have family. Whereas here we don't have options, but thankfully we do have family. So it's a learning curve. And I don't know how moms who work full time and have multiple kids do it. I have no idea how they do it or afford to do it.
Yeah, it's such a struggle. Yeah, it's such a struggle in rural places, right? The daycare and childcare options are really difficult to access if they even exist at all. So I know you're not living on the farm all the time, but when you think about being able to raise your kids near the farm, associated with agriculture or those types of things, what is your favorite thing about being able to raise your kids this way?
Oh, I love it. I mean, so we have 25 acres of our own, my husband and I do, and a lot of it's in hay. So we have our neighbor come in and custom bale our hay. And then our son goes out and rides with him. And then obviously he goes down the road and hangs out with my mom and dad on the farm. But I love that we're just close enough, right? Like, I don't know how I would feel if we were the farmers, right? Like if you would have asked me 10 years ago, like, I imagine my husband and I raising our kids on the farm and whatever. I don't know what that would look like. It never came true for us, so I don't know if I'll ever experience it. But I love that we can teach him. And most of our homeschooling includes going outside, walking in our woods, walking down our creek, going over to the neighbors, talking with them about their cattle. Like we had a festival here this past week called the Covered Bridge Festival. It's a huge, huge festival. And one of the vendors there was selling wool. And so part of our homeschool day yesterday was going to the festival, learning about the flour mill, learning about how local farmers are taking their honey and their venison and their wool and selling it at festivals like this. And so it's like, agriculture is integrated into every single part of what we do, not just because that's what my parents did and that's what my background is in, but that's how I can teach him math. That's how I can teach him science. That's how I can teach him entrepreneurship and life skills, and also, where your food comes from. And so again, that's where like that work-life balance for me is kind of elusive, because it's like there's no line between homeschool so like it's like the school life balance, right? Like that doesn't exist for us. Like it's just all integrated together. And I don't know I don't know any other way than that. So it just is.
So what is your biggest parenting struggle right now?
My biggest parenting struggle is that I love to work, but I also am a parent, and I have to figure out how to regulate that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but I do love coming up with new services. I want to create more webinars. I want more clients to serve, But I also have two kids who are wanting my full undivided attention, and they want me to love on them all day, every day. And I think that the mom guilt does not have a favorite person, right? Like it will affect every single mom. And that's my biggest hack. I only speak for myself, right? I can't speak for my husband and how that works as a dad, because I don't know what that feels like. But for me personally, I have that guilt of like, I want to work. I want to be creative. I want hobbies. I want to grow my skills, but I also have to teach them, and that's my responsibility. That's what I signed up for as a parent. And so I would just say like finding that personal time is something like, I just know I'm going to have to put that aside mostly for another season or two. Right. And so I know that they're only little for a while, and I have to put myself aside, and that's hard, right? Like I think I'm kind of a selfish person. I like my alone time. That's how I get energy, is to be alone. I want me time, and I don't necessarily get that a lot.
I think as an introvert, it's incredibly important that we do show our kids that it is not selfish to take time for ourselves and to take time for our interests, and to say, I will cuddle you in 10 minutes, but not right now. Or you've been in my lap for 6 hours, get off me for a minute. Not that I've ever said that, of course, but hypothetically, and to show our kids that parents are people, and to show our spouses and our coworkers and whoever else that parents are still people. And it's not in any way, shape, or form a negative thing to expect to be treated like a person, which is easier said than done a lot of the time.
I love that so much. I mean, there are several days where I have to say, like, I need about a 6-foot bubble around me. I just am not like touchy today, right? Like, I'm not a touchy person ever. And so I have to communicate that. I'm like, I love you so much, but mommy just needs her space today. Or I think we need to have our own rooms. You get your whole room to yourself today, right? Like, just give me a couple of hours to go to this. Or we need to go outside and take a walk, and we're just going to be quiet. Nobody's talking for the walk, right? Like, I have to say that. Or unfortunately, like there are nights where I don't read a bedtime story, and I don't feel bad about it. Like hey, I let you stay up 10 minutes late. No bedtime story tonight. We'll talk about this tomorrow. Like, mommy's got to wind down a little bit, right? Like, it's fine. And some days I do have the mom guilt, but I know that it's necessary for me to have that alone time.
Do you have kind of a farm specific piece of parenting advice that you would like to share with listeners? Or I mean, like from your coaching work too, even some kind of parenting advice that you think that farmers need to hear today?
Well, I think I'm more of a type B personality than a type A. But there's this like getting dirty thing that I'm just not okay with. Like I'm not the mom that wants to get the Play-Doh out. I'm not the mom that, like the kinetic sand, like I don't want the mess. I don't want to deal with it. I'm not crafty like that. I don't want you playing out in the mud. For some reason, my brain just like can't handle it. But my biggest piece of advice is like, let them get dirty. Like, it's okay to let them struggle. It's okay to let them learn on their own. Like, my daughter falls down every 6 seconds right now. It's okay to let her stub her toe and cry and be fine. I'm not going to tell her it's okay. It's not okay. She's pissed. Her toe hurts. Her toenail literally fell off. I'm not going to tell her it's all okay. Right. So like, letting them play, letting them explore, letting them get hurt and fall down and figure out how to stand back up on their own is probably my biggest piece of advice, because it has made my kids so much tougher. And I think it helps them appreciate so much of like, hey, I'm proud of myself. I figured this out on my own. I didn't need mom and dad to step up and tell me how to figure things out. And so I think my biggest parenting advice is just like, let them fail. Let them fall. Let them figure it out.
So we ask all of our guests, if you were going to dominate a category at the county fair, what would it be? And you can make up a category if you want.
I have been thinking about this ever since you gave me the prompt. Like, when was that? Like 2 weeks ago. I have no idea. I don't know. I would probably dominate like the judging station. Like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't have any idea. Maybe
That's a skill, though. I mean, yeah, you could judge the food. We've had people say that they want to be the pie judge or the
deal. Yeah, that works. We'll do that.
because I mean, my kids are in judging. Some of my kids have done judging 4-H, and I mean that's a skill. You have to learn how to break it down and taste all the things.
Okay, we'll go with that.
That works. So I'm going to go ahead and move into our cussing and discussing segment. If you're a listener and want to submit yours, you can use our speak pipe or send us an email and we will share it on the show. Katie, what are you cussing and or discussing this week?
So we live in a house that's almost 120 years old. We live in the rural Midwest, starting to get cold out, which means that little critters come in the house. So we've got Asian ladybugs just like raining from the ceiling, and box elder bugs, and flies, and. But somewhere above my desk, and I think it might actually be external to the house, there is a creature. It has toenails. It is very fast, and it will skitter for about 3 feet, and then it slides.
You can hear it.
And it goes both directions.
Oh gosh.
And it just goes and goes and goes. And I don't really care that there's a critter because old farmhouse. But not being able to see the damn thing and see what it is, whether it's a mouse or a chipmunk, or I'm sure it's a mouse, but
And what is it sliding on? Now I'm curious about what's up in the ceiling.
I don't know. Does it have like a Ferris wheel and a giant slide up there?
What has some previous generation put plaster over top of?
Why does it keep running back and forth? Why is it not happy just staying in one spot? So if anyone has a good idea about how to see what this thing is without like drilling holes all over my house trying to find it, and also how to not be the crazy person who would be okay with drilling holes all over their house just to see what it is, that'd be great. Anyway, Kacee, what do you have to cuss and discuss today?
Well, right before my first call this morning, I felt like at 9, I got ready to jump on my computer and my internet wheel was spinning, like loading. And I'm like, what the heck? Why is my internet not working? Well, we had a little bit of a windstorm. Obviously, like when Helene came through, we got some of the brush from it. But that was really it. We haven't really had any storms or anything. But there is a thing that points, like an antenna thing for our internet. And if it's not pointing the specific point that it needs, our internet goes out. And so I had to go outside and find a stick and push it to the right angle. So that's what I'm cussing right now is rural internet, because I don't know if the wind pushed it down or what. I don't know. Maybe a squirrel landed on it. But if it's not pointing the specific angle, your internet won't work. So I had to go like inch it up. So that's what I'm cussing right now.
Yeah, rural internet is always tricky. And just when you think you've got it figured out, then you don't.
Arlene, what do you have today?
Mine is more of a discuss. So the other day, a friend asked if I wanted to join a women's volleyball league. And I was thinking about, like us having our own interests as parents. And I've reached the stage in my life where, my kids are a bit older. My youngest is 9. So people are fairly self-sufficient and, things are such that, if I'm out for a few hours in an evening, it's no big deal anymore. Where I used to, someone would be clinging to my leg and it would be the worst thing ever if I ever left the house because people would die without me. Not my husband, the children, they thought that they could not survive if I left the house.
No, I assume it's your husband.
Yes, no, don't leave. I can't do it.
We know the truth, Arlene. It's okay.
I can't do bedtime by myself. It's horrible. Anyway, so it's like 5 minutes away. The local high school is quite close. But I just thought it was so interesting. I'm not saying I was good, but how those types of skills, because I think it's probably been at least a decade since I played volleyball. And even then it was probably like in someone's yard. How like that kind of stuff that you learn as a kid and a teenager can come back. I mean, also the sense of like, thinking that you can like spike and you really can't. But it's so cool how our bodies have that memory for things, and kind of like remembering where to stand and like the rules of the game and all that kind of stuff. Like I haven't even thought about volleyball for so many years, but it's still in there somewhere. So anyway, just the way the human brain retains things, and that other things are like gone. The second, the person's name that I met who I was playing with that night, don't remember that. But I do remember how to move around a volleyball court. I need to practice serving, though, for sure. That didn't come back quite as quickly. Anyway, we want to thank you so much, Kacee, for joining us today. And you mentioned it before, but you have a website, you have some services. Where should people go online to find you when their internet is working, of course?
Yes, CaceeBohle.com is my website that you can find pretty much everything that's going on. But the best way to see what events are happening or get free resources is to click the link in my bio on Instagram or LinkedIn. I'm Ag Coach Kacee on Instagram and just Kacee Bohle on LinkedIn. But those are probably where I'm most active, is my stories. I don't post a whole lot on Instagram, so you'll find like 6 posts, but I am very active in the stories, and finding the link in my bio is where you can enroll for any of the webinars or courses or book a call with me for one-on-one coaching and things like that. And lots of free resources I'm always sending out. Like right now I have the 4 tips for finding family time this fall. So if that's something that you guys are interested in, just go to the link in my bio and you can grab a free guide there.
That is great. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kacee.
Thank you for joining us on Barnyard Language. If you enjoy the show, please support us on Patreon with a donation.
Big thanks go out to our show editor, Krista Paffrath at the Rural Podcast Network.
Please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen, and follow the show so you never miss an episode.
If you want to connect with other farming families, join the private Barnyard Language Facebook group.
We are always in search of future guests for the podcast. If you or someone you know would like to chat with us, get in touch.